Lex, Woody, thank you for joining me today. I think it's safe to say whilst cybersecurity capabilities and awareness seem to have increased, unfortunately the threat and sophistication of the types of attacks that we're seeing have essentially gotten worse in reality. Even in the first 8 months of this year, we're seeing record heights of number of ransomware attacks and publicly breached records that we're seeing come to the front. So much so, 623 million records in the first 8 months. And this is really despite all the investments that have been made, security awareness that's been put into place, and also cybersecurity now making it to a board level conversation. Lex, I'm probably going to come to you first if you don't mind. Taking all that into consideration, what do you think has gone wrong?
I think it's a plethora of problems. I think, firstly, when we think about it initially, cybersecurity, while it has moved more to the fore, I think budgets are tighter than ever. I think post-COVID, we thought things would bounce back fully, and they still haven't. A lot of organisations are still putting back until later when they'll have more budget to do things. So while there is more awareness, I don't think there is quite the directness in order to get everything achieved and rolled out as quickly as possible. I think the other problem we find as well is that it's not quite as simple as catching up and staying level with the bad actors. I think the problem that we find there is it's a game of cat and mouse, and quite often we're on the back foot as the cybersecurity specialists trying to react to the new threats and avenues of attack that they're using. Obviously, we use new technologies and we try and plot trends and see what's going on and understand where things may be going and try and predict going forwards. But obviously you're kind of going into the abyss and you're just making your best guess at that point. So it's kind of a mixture of hoping you get that needle in the haystack, as well as obviously reacting to what comes and what's new. Other things that would have driven the growth and in attacks, along with the fact that there is more cybersecurity awareness, I think is diversification. So in our threat report, one of the things that we see is we saw in the first half of last year, or rather last half of last year, first half of this year, we saw 87% growth in cryptojacking attacks. And for those of you that don't know, that's essentially mining cryptocurrency using somebody else's compute power. And that's a big growth. 87% is a big jump. But in the second half of this year, we saw 400%, well actually 399, but who's counting? That's even bigger than 87%. So we've seen a big diversification just from ransomware across to malware of different variety. While malware as a family has maybe shrunk ever so slightly, diversification, it's not all their coins aren't in the ransomware bucket now. They're kind of diversified into different areas where they can get more money elsewhere. And I think that is one of the key things, because when we look at things like cryptojacking, it really takes advantage of what's going on with cloud and basically trying to take advantage of cloud services where people are less aware. I think people, as you were saying, are more aware than ever of cyber. Yeah. But I think, again, another thing is they think about it in the traditional sense of the perimeter, the organisation, the assets that they control, but they don't necessarily think about SaaS assets and platforms in the cloud, mainly because they assume the cloud providers will provide the security, but actually they don't, and if they do, it's an add-on, it isn't included as standard. So it's one of those sort of catch-22s. There's a lot of, oh yes, you get all of this, and then you read the fine print and actually you only get a small amount. So people think they're getting more than they are. And I think because of that, cloud is a bigger area now for plundering by cyber criminals. I would say it's sort of the new frontier. While it's been around for a while, I think the big move to cloud, I remember when it first started about 8 years ago, and everybody ran to cloud and ran away from it because there wasn't the infrastructure to get everything into the cloud. But now more and more organizations are cloud first. I think it's becoming the new area of attack. And again, as I said before, I think more organizations, while are more cyber aware, think about it more consistently for their own assets rather than cloud-based assets. Mm-hmm. So I'd say those would be some driving factors for this growth.
Brilliant. And Woody, in your case?
Yeah, so I think the way I like to look at it is is in 3 different areas. So we like to use the MITRE attack framework. It's a framework that tries to categorize all the different methods in which you can be attacked. That was established in 2015. And in 2015, we had less than 100 different attack vectors. Roll that forward to the beginning of this year, we have nearly 1,000 different attack vectors, and that growth has been exponential. So this acceleration in threat, the landscape, it is definitely accelerating. So I think that bit of evidence there backs up what you're saying in terms of the growth. And you can see that the growth is exponential. The other way that we like to look at it is the volume of attacks is increasing. And I think this is largely down to automation and, dare I say, AI. But, being able to generate lots and lots of attacks and throw a lot of mud out there and see what sticks from an opportunistic attack perspective. So, both the growth in the different areas that you can attack and the volume of attacks is really the pressure that our customers and our partners are feeling. So what's going wrong? I'm not sure that anything fundamental is going wrong. But I agree with what you said there. It is definitely a cat and mouse game. And so as the volume of these attacks increase and as the different attack vectors start to come to bear, customers and partners are panicking. How do we make sure that we're covering all our bases? How do we make sure that we're keeping up with these perpetrators? And I think that's really where the challenge is for our customers and our partners, is being able to address this growth in different attack vectors, but also the sheer volume of attacks that are coming in.
Yeah. And ransomware has really retaken off, hasn't it? If you think back to 2017 when we had WannaCry, which at the time was devastating. I remember walking into our office that day and it was absolute pandemonium. But you look at the scale in which the ransomware attacks have increased in volume, as you say, we're in a much worse place. You look at some of the statistics around ransomware as a service. It's such an easy, accessible tool for individuals to now go online with no knowledge, no prior coding information or anything, and launch an attack on an organization within seconds. So the accessibility and the ease of access to those tools is getting greater. So I think it's becoming more difficult, which is tough. So based on all of that, and we hear a lot about frameworks and Cyber Essentials Plus, ISO accreditations. We've got NIST 2 that's coming as well. Do you think there are any gaps in people's posture or cybersecurity infrastructure today where they could maybe do more? And I know it's not all around technology; it's around people, processes. But do you think there are some gaps that people have today? Probably start with you, Lex.
Sure. I think some of the areas, again, sounding a bit like a broken record, but a lot of people don't secure their cloud services. They assume that all the security is there. But actually, if you look at cloud storage services like Box and Dropbox as examples, they basically state you are responsible for the data that goes into that cloud storage. They don't scan it, they don't monitor it. It's up to you to secure that data. And so because of this, we've seen the birth of SaaS API apps that will hook into these cloud services, do antivirus scanning, do zero-day threat scanning. But of course, that is just presumed that because you're buying from a big name label that they do it. But actually, the fine print says, no, we don't. It's up to you to look after your own data. And that's an important thing. I think there's this just almost inbuilt belief that if you're going to a large brand in the cloud, they've taken care of everything. But they really haven't. And I think there's this level of complacency that people have fallen into. So I think cloud's a big area. Again, I think training, I don't think there's enough awareness. And one of the biggest areas that we see in cybercrime is social engineering. You step out of the side of the attacks for more targeted and larger attacks. Social engineering is really where it comes down to. You get individuals that are literally paid by organisations to test that and go into organisations and blag their way in, get access to the server room. And these things happen, and it's one of those things that if you can manipulate people using known psychological traits and attacks, you can get information, get access to things that you wouldn't be able to, or maybe get them to do things that they otherwise wouldn't do. And
there's absolutely no defense against that, right? You can educate, but there's nothing to stop a Manchester City fan slipping you 500 quid in a brown paper envelope under the table and asking for your corporate creds. So we can do everything in the world in terms of looking at what can we do proactively from a defensive perspective, what can we do to monitor and detect, what can we put in place to make sure we can recover our business and become operational again, have we got good IT hygiene in place, but that 10%, according to Gartner, 10% of attacks are always going to be related to human frailties, whether that be social engineering or mistakes or accidents.
Well, we saw it with the MGM hack in Vegas, didn't we, really? That was a social engineering attack where I think it was somebody called the support team, got the MFA token and went straight in. So
Can't defend against that.
no, it's tough.
It's tough.
Super tough. So gaps then are really cloud infrastructure. People are moving to the cloud or, transitioning to the cloud, and you've got the shared responsibility model. Whose responsibility is it? Is it mine to secure the data and the infrastructure, or is it, the cloud provider?
It's a sliding scale.
Yeah.
Depending where you sit within that framework depends on how much responsibility is yours and how much of it belongs to the provider. So it's not a clear cut, well, it's in the cloud, it's mine, or it's in the cloud, it's theirs. It's, well, actually, depending on what parts of their services I'm utilising, some of it's my responsibility and some of it's theirs.
It differs depending on what provider you're using. If you're using infrastructure as a service, the infrastructure is out of your hands, but the application and the data and the users are your responsibility. If you're using platform as a service, that, like you said, that sliding scale slides up a bit. And it's very difficult for some customers to understand that.
I think it's probably more difficult for smaller businesses to understand that maybe don't have the prior knowledge that people like us in the industry necessarily have around that shared infrastructure responsibility. So maybe smaller businesses find it more difficult to secure their data when it's in the cloud, maybe.
And I think that's fair. It's one of those things that isn't immediately obvious. We've grown up in our lifetime understanding that if you've got an endpoint, you put endpoint security on it. If you've got a perimeter, you put a gateway firewall on it. These are things that are taken as given and writ because, it's something that's ground into us since we were young. It's just something that we all know. People take that for granted. But the cloud, while it's been around for a while, is still quite new to a lot of businesses and a lot of individuals. And I don't think they know how to approach it properly.
The other trap, of course, is the smaller the business, the more likely the owner of the business is going to say, well, it's not going to happen to me. It's not going to happen to me at all. So we have to address that. We have to explain that these risks are relevant everywhere. If you look at who the attacks are coming from, you could have the opportunists who are using that automation and that ransomware as a service just to throw out attacks and see what sticks. You've then got maybe organized crime. These are more organized. They have a more sort of higher value targets that they're going after. There could be industrial espionage, or there could be nation states. And I think depending on who you are as a small business, any one of those threat actors could be a risk to you. And they'll all have different approaches.
I was going to say security through obscurity doesn't really work.
Yeah.
And again, just because you're a small player, because you're just a one-man band with a small business that you think you won't be attacked, you might provide service to a larger organisation. And while the cyber criminals, be they nation state, be they sort of organised crime or what have you, or even script kiddies, whoever they are, if they can't breach the larger organisation, they can use a supply chain attack to essentially utilise your weaker security, compromise your network and piggyback off of that into the network in which they want to get into. And you go back a few years, probably one of the biggest ones was Target, where this happened, where the air conditioning firm that maintained their air conditioning was piggybacked because they had low security. They couldn't breach Target, but they could breach the AC company and use them to gain access. So I think everybody's a target. I don't think you can say, well, why would anybody attack me? Well, that you might not have something of value that they need, but you may have access to something that they need.
I think we saw that earlier last year with a managed service provider where they were providing the application services to part of the NHS, which then was the supply chain attack, and that was their routine, and it meant that they can then laterally move into other parts of the organisation, which is tough.
It is tough. There's a great story of, this is an older story, goes back to COVID days when a CEO of a company was sent home and was told, you have to work from home now, you can't come into the office. And her teenage son, who was not going to school, had hacked his PlayStation to get, free software. And that's how they got into the home network through the PlayStation. Ended up onto the CEO's machine and then into the corporate network.
But I remember when Amazon Alexis came out and you used to walk into a business meeting with a C-level exec and on their desk was an Amazon Alexa and you'd go, is that connected to the network? Because it's got zero security on it, which, you start then going into a whole plethora of IoT device vulnerability, and vulnerabilities are huge at the moment. There's lots of vulnerabilities in legacy operating systems. There's vulnerabilities in big software companies that we've seen recently as well. So, I guess that's another area of increase where we're seeing a lot of attacks, which is, not great. Something you mentioned before was around, I guess something you've mentioned before, something that's very topical at the moment, is around artificial intelligence. So, no surprise, AI has been around for a very, very long time. Certainly in the cybersecurity industry, the companies that you work for have used it for a very long time as well. So, not necessarily new per se, but obviously now you've got people talking around generative AI and how that's going to change the world, and you've got the bad threat actors that are using AI for hyper targeting and quicker response times in access to the network. And likewise, I guess us in the security industry are using it for good as well. So, Woody, I'll probably come to you first. Where do you think Gen AI or any form of AI plays its role in cybersecurity?
So I want to veer away from generative AI, because generative AI is something that analyzes a bunch of facts and comes up with new facts based on those facts. And I think that's very interesting as an AI technology. But specifically for cybersecurity, I see three areas where we're going to have tremendous benefit from this overall technology. The first one is, as we see this increase in attacks, how do we deal with these huge amounts of information? Absolutely, tons and tons, trillions of events, IDs that are coming in. How is it possible for a set of human eyes to be able to make sense of that? We have to employ AI techniques like contextual analysis to be able to make sense of all of this information and compartmentalize it. Then the second discipline that's very relevant, and it's a discipline we've been using for over 10 years, is machine learning. So you've got this categorized information. How do we derive value from that? How do we draw correlations between this information to identify what's really meaningful, give us insightful, impactful information about what's really meaningful in all of this? And we use machine learning to ingest new IP addresses and domains every day and analyze which ones pose a risk, to our customers and which ones don't. So that's a core technology that's already quite mature in our space. And then the third one that we're investing in as an organization is large language models. This is not really to detect or to identify threats, but this is to allow ordinary people, ordinary IT staff, IT admins that aren't necessarily cybersecurity analysts, to make sense of this information, to be able to interact with this information using natural language and to be able to get that information out. So those are three specific areas where we're actively working on leveraging these techniques. But I want to encapsulate all of this with the phrase automation. Forget about AI. It's all about automation, right? The scale at which things are happening is so huge. We cannot rely on humans alone. We have to employ these techniques to automate a lot of the sifting and the sorting and the categorization. So automation should really be the key word, not so much AI.
Understood. Sorry.
Absolutely. These things are used to reduce things like alert fatigue that plenty of people suffer with because there's too much information to process for the non-individual. And that doesn't mean it's not relevant, but being able to sift through it all to find what's relevant, that's where the machine learning, AI and automation come in to do the heavy lifting for you, essentially.
I think that's probably a gap for a lot of partners. So something that we talk about a lot is the security matrix. So reactive, proactive, and adaptive cybersecurity. Reactive is single point product, legacy, perimeter type security. And then you move to that more proactive posture where actually there's probably a lot more events that are happening, but you haven't got the skills or the knowledge in-house or the manpower or the investment, really, because it's very rare that people just click their fingers and they've created a SOC. So that's definitely where machine learning plays its role in that alert fatigue, as you mentioned, because there's millions and billions of events happening every single day in certain organizations. To your point, Woody, it's almost impossible for somebody to sift through all that data and actually get a meaningful outcome.
We've done some analysis. We reckon that a typical 50-person organization with 50 endpoints and a number of services that go along with it will generate upwards of 2.5 billion events in their log files every day. And that needs to be brought down to a manageable number that real people can take informed decisions on.
Yeah, okay, cool. And I guess just to wrap things up, really, everything we've kind of spoke about there, where do you think is the biggest opportunity for some of our channel partners that we're working with at the moment over the next 12 months, whether that be machine learning or implementing AI or whatever it may be? Woody, I'll start with you.
Sure. So we've spoken a lot about AI and automation and the importance of that. I don't think that our partners need to become domain experts there, but the services that they select and the tool sets that they deploy for their customers should have that stuff baked in. So I think that's how you get adoption rates, or how you get into the field of automation. The second thing is, I would definitely tie yourself to a framework, whether that's Cyber Essentials Plus, or whether it's ISO, or whether it's SOC, or upcoming NIS. Set your stall out in terms of a framework and help guide your customers through that journey of how to be cyber resilient, thinking about proactive monitoring and reactive tool sets and approaches. And then double down on basic hygiene. We talk about ransomware, we talk about phishing, we talk about social engineering. The number one exploit, the number one way into an organization is an open port. Okay, so practice the good hygiene.
Awesome. And Lex, you, final thoughts?
I think areas where organizations can really add value to their customer base and secure them more effectively. I think there's one thing I see a lack of is human training, just basically training the staff to be more aware of phishing emails. Email is still the number one attack vector to get malware into an organization. And one of the biggest threats that we see on the horizon, just coming back to AI, is, we've talked about all the benefits from our side, but now what we've started to see more targeted emails that move with the climate. So sort of pre-COVID, we started seeing everything around housing because we were seeing the break in the tax relief for housing. So emails were going around about that. COVID happened. Suddenly it was all about COVID patches and getting all your vaccinations and everything in time and tricking you into going that way. But one of the things we're worried about seeing in volume going forwards is using AI to monitor news feeds regionally and then having the AI generate mail automatically. So you'll get phishing mail generated off of actual real-time events and having really contextual data that goes out. And that's going to be much harder to detect because it's not going to be, it's your usual Nigerian prince. It's going to be something that was on the news last night. Yeah. And that's going to be problematic because instead of being, it's a COVID thing, it's clearly COVID because these are being spamming out forever, it will change on a daily or weekly basis to be much more current and much harder to detect.
So really then what you're saying is that awareness bit is absolutely key to be able to educate staff. Absolutely. To know and spot the difference.
I think education is key, and you're never going to catch everything. Everybody gets
and retaining your staff, right? I think if you're in the cybersecurity space and you have a certification or you've been practiced in that area, you are gold dust at the moment. So our partners need to hang on to those resources, and by hanging on to those resources, you generate customer trust, and you'll be able to succeed in the space.
Awesome. Well, go on. Sorry.
And lastly, I just wanted to say, remember that security doesn't end at the perimeter.
No.
You're going to have remote workers, you're going to have cloud services. So don't just concentrate all of what you're doing on your data centers and your organization, but think about where it reaches out, where it touches to, and understand, again, I guess it comes back almost to the human factor, other organizations that you work and liaise with how is data shared and information shared between your organizations? Again, getting back to the supply chain problem. So making sure that you vet to make sure, again, back to frameworks, that the people that you are doing business with are also on frameworks and understand the relevance of security. Because obviously you can put all the security in place, but if you end up partnering with someone that doesn't understand it, it can be very problematic and can lead to sort of attacks coming into your organization.
Awesome. Well, thank you very much for your time, guys. Really appreciate it.
Great.
And yeah, thanks
for having us.
Thank you.